This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. Amy Sample Ward is the CEO of NTEN, a membership community that seeks to create a world where all nonprofit organizations use technology skillfully and confidently to meet community needs and fulfill their missions. Amy is dedicated to educating and supporting organizations in using technology to create meaningful community engagement and make lasting change. Whether it is by connecting individuals, organizations, campaigns, or possibilities, Amy hopes to facilitate the nonprofit technology sector transitioning into a movement-based force for positive change. In addition to serving as NTEN CEO, she is a speaker, author, and trainer, having worked with groups and spoken at events around the world. In 2013, she co-authored Social Change Anytime, Anywhere: How to Implement Online Multi-Channel Strategies to Spark Advocacy, Raise Money, and Engage Your Community with Allison Capon. She previously co-authored Social by Social, a handbook in using social technologies for social impact, and has contributed to various other publications about social change and technology. I spoke with Amy in Portland. Hello, Amy. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Where are you sitting on this lovely June day today?
I am sitting at my desk in NTEN's Portland office, really our only office here in Portland, Oregon, where it is supposed to be in the 90s today, which is
that's like unprecedented.
Yeah.
Do people know what to do when it's 90?
Already panicking. We're going to melt. We need to have popsicles at the ready.
That's fantastic. Well, I wish you a lovely June day. That's going to be fantastic. Hopefully you'll be able to go out and ride a bike or something.
Yes.
You are the CEO of an organization called NTEN.
I am NTEN, the Nonprofit Technology Network.
Tell us what NTEN does and how you're creating good in the world.
Well, NTEN, so I can share a little bit about what NTEN is, and I think our history or how we came to be an organization is a little bit unique. So I'll share that as well. So NTEN, the Nonprofit Technology Network, we are focused on making sure that every nonprofit organization, whether they're, regardless of their size, their budget, the number of staff they have, or what their mission focus is, that all nonprofits know how to use technology to be effective in actually meeting their mission. We would like the world changed, and we'd like it changed a little bit quicker than it's currently being changed in technology for all different reasons, whether that's staff effectiveness, knowing what you're working on, being able to track your impact. All of those different pieces, come through technology, and we want to make sure all organizations know how to make good decisions, know how to invest in technology, know how to train their staff, all of those pieces. And quickly, our history, the piece that I think is a little bit interesting, we always say we are a community. We are the community of nonprofit technology people, where the NTEN community is about 70,000 people strong now. That means not all of those people are NTEN members, but they're people who have participated in our educational events. They're people who have come to our conferences. They've downloaded our reports, whatever that might be. They've participated in some way. And those are mostly all people who work in the nonprofit sector. And regardless of what their job title is or what their organization's focus, mission is, they recognize that technology is critical to their success. So we have communications folks and development folks and leadership staff and, everybody across an organization trying to, talk and share and learn together about what tools to use. And that community existed before NTEN existed. There were people, of course, in nonprofits or people outside of nonprofits who worked as consultants or contractors, advisors. There were people who recognized the role and the importance of technology in nonprofits. And those folks were trying to self-organize, which turns out is a lot of work to put on a conference or a meeting. So after trying to self-organize for a while, the community basically voted to form NTEN, and here we are. So when we say that we're a community-driven organization and that we're, focused on our community, it's because really, truly, the community did form the organization, and we're here to support that community and, of course, to help it grow and expand into more people that are aware of the resources and the connections they could have through NTEN.
Super cool. And in the development and aid world, we have Interaction, we have Inside NGO, we have a number of these similar types of more than spontaneous sort of, comings togethers of a community.
Yeah.
First question about NTEN. When the community decided to get together and put it together, did everybody pitch in some money? Was everybody like, hey, we've got great intentions, we'll volunteer? What was like the first step in creating that business structure?
Sure. So there were, in that community already, before NTEN was formed, there were representatives from nonprofits. There were folks who were consultants and advisors to nonprofits, but there were also funders already a part of that community. So when everyone kind of voted to form NTEN, there were funders and technology providers who were already in that community who stepped up to say, and we will put in that initial money to make sure that this new organization gets off the ground to continue convening all of us, which is why today we are not a community or a membership that's exclusive to nonprofit staff, but truly you can be a service provider, a technology provider, a funder, all of those groups that create the larger sector are part of the community now, and we're part of it from the beginning. So our initial supporters were Microsoft, who continues to support us to today, the Cerdna Foundation, and the AOL Foundation.
That's fantastic. You've got those foundations on board.
Yeah.
You started with them as the membership director, is that correct?
I did. Back at the beginning of 2011, I came in as the membership director, and kind of at that time, NTEN had operated as a membership organization, but had never had a staff person exclusively focused on membership. So there had been someone managing it, of course, but also managing many other parts of the programmatic work. So it was an opportunity for that staff person to focus on another area. And I came in looking just at membership and how do you plan for value and engagement, and how do you support this, really huge community, right? That's all over the world when not everybody can come to the conference each year. So what does that look like to still extend that feeling of community?
So what is that? What's the answer?
The answer is different, for each community. So I've worked in community engagement, how that is defined and what that looks like operationally has been different in every organization, but I've done that my kind of whole career so far. So the thing that's always the same is that it's always going to be based on the community, but it'll probably look different than the last time you did it. So when at one point in my career, I was working in an organization based here in Oregon that was focused on public education reform, but doing so from a community perspective versus a legislative, a policy-only perspective. So engagement and deep engagement, right? Like forming plans and recommendations and really kind of creating cohorts, if you will, was critical to that work. And that is going to look very different when you have educators and parents and students and administrators and all of these groups who are very much invested but have such different kind of angles into that investment and into that outcome versus NTEN's community, where everybody, every single person has a different perspective or desired outcome because it's their mission through the perspective of their job, through the perspective of who they're serving. So you almost have to operate without all of that nuance and just say, okay, what are we really all here for? And go to that larger goal, which is, as NTEN articulates it, it's either to connect and to learn and to change. So you're coming to meet those people, find others who could help you, find people who've done this thing before. Like, how many times, have we tackled a project and thought, I've never done this before, but surely I'm not the first person to create a website, or I'm not the first person to use a database. Like, someone else has done this before, or to learn about how we can do this work. We all could think, oh, I've read in the New York Times about this great campaign that, some organization ran. I want to do that too. Do you have any idea where to start? Like we see the outcome of so much work from organizations, but we don't necessarily know how to replicate that. So people come to the community looking to learn from each other. And then, of course, to actually change the way we do this work and change the way we engage with our staff, engage with our communities, really improve our organizations.
You said that at the beginning as well. You said that, we'd like to see change maybe a little faster.
Yeah.
What, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. What are your top 3 or 5 things that you'd like to see changed in the nonprofit world?
Well, I think I appreciate the attempt to get me to say specific things. I mean,
that's my job.
To avoid your question, I would say that if we have, so NTEN has, community members from all over the world. But if we want to look just at the US for a second and say, here in the US, we have approximately 1.8 million nonprofit organizations. Are we seeing dramatically in front of our eyes, our local cities improving, our communities within our city not necessarily needing the kinds of support because they have access to opportunity? I mean, are those 1.8 million organizations meeting their mission today? I would argue probably not, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, and why I do the work that I do and am interested in this approach, so, where NTEN doesn't focus on just environmental causes or only animal, organizations or whatever, is because I can't separate the issues. When I worked in public education, I felt frustrated every day because my mind couldn't focus on public education because it had to look also at the number of those families experiencing homelessness or the number of parents who had literacy levels but lower than their children, so weren't able to participate in the same way as other parents, or educators who had no mentorship opportunities and felt isolated. And all of these kind of complementary issues that surrounded that cause. So for me, I know I need to work in a networked space. I know that I need to be working where I can, be in a room with people from every different sector all at once, right? And it's great that there are people who can focus on a single issue. We need people to be able to do that. I just know I can't do that. And because of that, I would say, back to what I was alluding to by avoiding your question, there's so much opportunity to actually be meeting our missions, right? And we need technology, but also we need each other. We need to be in spaces where we're talking to organizations that don't do the same thing as us. We can learn from each other, but also I think once you create that space where they could be connecting and learning together about something else, that's where you also start creating opportunity for organizations to say, oh, we've both been in these workshops, or we've both been working on this project where, we're thinking about these topics. I actually see synergy between our organizations, or maybe there's a way that we could both participate in this program. I think I feel like I'm rambling, but the point is, I don't have one thing that I want us to fix. I want us to fix all of the things, right?
We got there. We want to fix everything. Fantastic.
Yes.
I'm not sure how to quite word this question. You started as the membership director, and now you're the CEO. What was the move there? What was the steps that took place for you to find yourself in the leadership role here at NTEN? I'm going to assume it's not your technology background. Is it your connectedness background? Is it the fact that you were the right person at the right time? How did that go down, basically?
Well, I applied. And so NTEN had the previous executive director prior to me. She had been the executive director for about 6 years and 10 years altogether with the organization. And when she transitioned out of the role, the board, opened up a kind of standard search. Anyone could apply, and I did, and interviewed amongst other candidates, and in the end was offered the position. Fantastic. So I think it was a pretty traditional process in that way. I don't know that I anticipated all of that happening, but I'm happy that I'm here.
How did you not anticipate? Do you think that you applied and we're not confident that you'd go that direction, or?
I think that folks were surprised to have the previous executive director transition out, because especially when you're a staff person, right? Like you work with this person and then it's like, okay, you're going to be transitioning out. Oh my gosh, like this isn't how I was thinking of the world, right? So when I applied, I also knew that I'd never been a CEO before. And I knew that, you have to be realistic in those processes, right? I knew that there were certainly things that I didn't have that I anticipated other applicants having, but there were also things I had that I didn't think they had. I had very much a history in this community and had been a member for many years before I joined the staff. Even though I hadn't been a CEO before, I've still managed fundraising campaigns and, created programs and managed community engagement strategies, all those things that are still very much a part of my job here. And NTEN is not an extremely large organization. So all staff are still working together on all of those aspects of our work.
You bring up an interesting point that, you said you've been working under the previous director, the previous CEO, excuse me, for several years. And when she decided to leave, there was a bit of a sea change in the nonprofit industry in general, and especially in the development and humanitarian aid world. Turnover is a critical issue for everyone. Yeah. Is there a way that you NTEN or, you're just the organization itself or your community thinks about that or deals with that in general, or is that's not on your radar screen?
Yeah, staff turnover is always going to be a thing, especially in small organizations where people may feel like they're outgrowing the role that they're in, and if there isn't another opportunity within the organization. The last 2 years, the 2 years that I've been the CEO, we've had a lot of very open conversations with staff about what that looks like and how do we create a space where staff don't feel like their option is to do the same job or to leave. If we're investing in staff and really, trying to create the best team possible, we don't want people to feel like their growth option is to leave the organization, right? Mm-hmm. So what that's meant for us, at least the staff that we have and the conversations we've had together, has meant, it's a little bit less about your job title and more about the responsibility and authority that you have to do your own job, and creating not necessarily a traditional kind of staff hierarchy of this is your boss and this is who you work with, but really recognizing that kind of cross-team value and how people who are all across the organization rely on you, and also you rely on them, right? So reflecting that in evaluations where people evaluate each other. It's not necessarily about, your quote unquote boss giving you evaluation. It's, I worked with these two people, the last 3 months on this project, so I'm going to evaluate both of them, and making sure everyone has professional development opportunities, that they're saying, I want to go to this conference and learn how to do this thing, and maybe I'll start doing that in my job, even though it's currently not what I do. So just creating that growth as an individual process instead of kind of a rigid, this is all that you're allowed to do in your job based on your job title. And if you don't want to do that, then you can leave. But at the same time, I don't anticipate that me or anyone else in the organization is going to stay here for 20 years. So if you are feeling like you want to change, if you're feeling like you aren't growing, I'd rather have an organization where it's really comfortable to say that out loud and have other staff be a part of that process to say, okay, this person, wants to move on. Let's all support them transitioning in a positive way, and then hiring somebody who can, learn everything and get up to speed. But, you don't want to have a fearful space around transition. Then it becomes that kind of debilitating churn, right? Versus a more open, positive process.
Right. And it becomes fear rather than true organic growth. And
exactly.
So tell us about your churn. How did you choose the nonprofit sector? I mean, the space that you're in, both technology, connecting, social media, these are all very sexy topics in the for-profit world. It's everything in the for-profit world. Why'd you choose not-for-profit? Where was that draw from? How did you get your start, cut your teeth?
I guess I never considered working in any other sector.
That is,
I mean, to be honest, growing up, my mom worked in a nonprofit for a few years while we were growing up, but for the most part, she didn't, and my dad didn't. But I still grew up very much with emphasis from them on service and social justice and the way that individuals can influence change. And so I kind of had always anticipated I would work in a nonprofit on an issue that I cared about. And when I was in college, I worked for an organization in the town where I went to college that served kind of a 3-county area focused on legal services, social services, and safe shelter for victims of domestic violence and their children. And, I came in thinking this is an issue that I feel extremely fortunate I have not experienced myself or observed in my family. And I recognize that that's a pretty rare situation to have no contact with that issue that's really prevalent, but it is something that I care about. I want more people to be in my position. I don't want people to have not experienced that be the smaller number. So I want to work in this. And I found that, I wasn't necessarily making a strategic decision to use certain tools or to create certain communications plans. I was just kind of doing the work, right? I was told, here's our goal, or here's a program that you're in charge of, make it happen. And I was using a lot of technology to do that. So at that time, Facebook was only for your college. You could only see people inside of your college. And I was using that to organize college-age students to become the volunteers and help them, kind of train each other on that volunteer onboarding so I didn't have to manage it all. I was, creating kind of segmented outreach. So volunteers were receiving different communications than donors and things like that. And, again, I wasn't necessarily thinking about it. I was just getting the work done. And when I graduated and came to move back to Oregon and had to transition all that work off to someone else in the organization, I realized, oh my gosh, no one here knows how to do any of this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just transitioning the group over, I'm explaining what Facebook is, why I was using it, how it's a valuable tool in supporting these people who are using this tool, already to communicate with each other. I'm explaining why we need to have segmented messages based on, someone's involvement with the organization. And okay, so maybe that's the space that I should continue to operate in as that liaison between the tools and the strategies and the people that we're trying to serve. So from there, I think that was kind of my path, was less about, any specific title or organization and more that opportunity to ensure that the kind of right tools were being used at the right time for the right group. And of course, the goal through all of that is that people are engaged in that mission, because we're not going to do any of this work by ourselves, right? Like, our 5 staff are never going to be the ones that go completely change the world. We need our community to be a part of that. And of course, we're not going to do that if we're only knocking on doors, right?
Mm-hmm.
That can be important, the face-to-face, but it's probably never going to be all that we do.
So tell me, how do you mentioned earlier, one of the key things that you help your organizations do, the community members within NTEC's community, NTEN, not NTEC, how they measure their success. How does NTEN measure its success within its, within supporting its community?
Sure. I mean, we have kind of our own internal day-to-day things that we're looking at, like any organization, are people coming to the training tomorrow, or did people download the report, things like that. But overall, we have a few larger outcomes that we've identified, and they're all up on the website and things like that. But really, we're trying to understand if there are more, at the most basic level, more individuals inside of an organization, right? More staff people that recognize that technology is going to be critical to their success, because not every organization has a quote unquote like IT director, and IT directors are not the only staff who use technology. So trying to have an explicit goal that that we are supporting people all across an organization is an important outcome for us to measure against, but it also guides a lot of our strategies and helps us make decisions around, the type of programs to have or the type of reports to look at, et cetera. And then from there, we're looking at, are those organizations changing? Are they improving their policies? Are they using technology more effectively? Are they actually becoming more effective as organizations?
When you think about, how that community continues to evolve, one of my favorite questions to ask is, has there been either a program or a training or a information product or some, community event that you've had that completely blew you away, completely unexpected result about what you thought you'd get from that event? Something that you'd go and sit down with somebody over a cup of coffee and be like, let me tell you about this. This happened last week. Is there something that pops to mind?
When that community kind of formed NTEN, our nonprofit technology conference has been the annual conference we've had ever since the beginning. And it's at this stage a pretty big conference. It's 2,000 people. There's 125 sessions. I mean, it's just
That's a big conference. Yeah.
It's a big conference. And last year in September, we launched a second conference that's purposefully a fraction of the size, just a couple hundred people. And it's not really in any kind of, on every line item, it's a different process. So instead of lots of sessions, there's just facilitated workshops. Instead of a kind of exhibit hall, there are limited numbers of sponsors, and they're there as experts to give you feedback on your work. So it's really a space for nonprofit professionals to come in and say, I have been wanting to figure out our membership strategy for years, and I need the next 4 days to help me get there, or I think there's a better way to run this program, and I just haven't gotten around to figuring it out, or I would love to run a campaign and I have no idea what to do, coming in with some sort of challenge or idea or, thing that's been on the wish list for a long time, and kind of going with the process and have a 2.5-day experience, facilitated workshops to get you to complete that project. And then the final day is an accelerator. And last year, like I said, was the first year we just launched it. And so to us, our expectations were this is a huge experiment to see if it's of value, to see if people actually come up with ideas that are of value to them, if this is a worthwhile investment. And people showed up, and that was basically the bar of, okay, people actually showed up to this thing that has never happened. So we couldn't point to what it looked like last year, right? The first year is always the most difficult in promotion. So people showed up and were like, okay, that's wonderful. But then what was so surprising is the number of people who came in totally open. They didn't have an idea in mind. They didn't have a specific project they wanted to work on. They just kind of gave into the process, and over the couple days came up with ideas that weren't just great ideas, but that have been invested in, have been completely developed, have received grants, it actually was what we said it was going to be. And I guess it's not very good to sound surprised or to say that that was a surprising outcome. But, we kind of thought it would be a space for people to connect and share and create relationships and, maybe think some things through. But instead, there were people coming out of it with extremely tangible, very real programs and services that were going to support far more people in their community than they were currently serving. And there were people in the room saying, we want to fund that. That is an important thing that you have just created. Let's make it happen, which was kind of overwhelming in the moment to see actually materialize.
Are you close enough to that event that there's maybe one or two of those that stand out, a very specific program that you thought?
Yeah, there was one that was really interesting. A woman from North Carolina who works in services that support children in foster service. And, she came in not necessarily with a program in mind, but as she started working through some of the, workshops and thinking about opportunity to serve, the story that came to her was, the number of young people that they're serving and supporting in foster service that then turn 18 and legally are now an adult and just kind of, wake up that morning on their birthday and are essentially kicked out of service. So thinking about what a continued service model would look like, where, you're having to think about government service and funds being allocated or not allocated against that support, but also what does it look like to really leverage partnerships and, bring in incentives that are focused really on supporting these people, but create more community. And she had wonderful ideas that, like I said, have received support now and being built out. So I think that was something where we could have never thought of that idea to even say, hey, if you're thinking about expanding service, you should come to this conference and think
of course.
about it, but she came in pretty open and, just thinking about where they have missed opportunity and kind of generated something that I think is not just important for their community to have as a extended program, but also something that could really be replicable in other service areas.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of, how that will replicate or what the future looks like, what do you think the future looks like for NTEN or for connecting the nonprofit world and teaching them how technology is important? What do the next 5 years look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So back in, I would say, like early 2000s, the NTEN community was primarily staff in nonprofits who identified as the technology staff person or consultants and contractors who were essentially outsourced IT. And around the kind of 2005, 2007 time, when, as you'll remember, social media really took off and websites changed. Some of the websites changed from being kind of an online brochure to really dynamic spaces online. The NTEN community changed pretty quickly to having a lot more communications staff and fundraising staff joining the community, because now all of a sudden they are using the database, right? And they're trying to send out email appeals and they're trying to figure out how to make their website more appealing and engaging. So the community really shifted at that time, and it meant the content needed to shift and we needed to have programs, educational programs that maybe weren't as technical because they weren't for people that needed to know or wanted to know the really kind of back-end technical pieces, but they needed to know how to use that tool and how to make it work for them. And then more recently, as I think funders and just the larger nonprofit sector conversation has shifted around outcomes and impact and data, we've seen another shift in program staff and leadership level staff coming to the community saying, we would love to be able to prove that we're helping all these people, but we don't know how to prove that. Or we have a bunch of data that we have no idea what it means, so putting it in a graph is probably not very helpful. So it's been interesting to see as these larger kind of trends and shifts in the sector influence how people recognize that technology is needed for them and what kinds of technology they need. And I anticipate that we'll continue to see those shifts happen, both with, different areas of staff, but also what they're coming for. And to me, it's great that we have people coming and saying, I want to know what our impact is, and I want to figure out how to measure that and tell that story, versus people coming and saying, I want to use Facebook. Or, if you're coming with just a specific tool, you're probably not going to feel like you get the answers you want, right? But if you're coming with an outcome in mind, with a goal and a strategy of why you want that, I think you're going to be open to many more connections, many more resources, a lot more learning, because there are a million different ways to prove your impact, right? So coming in with that goal instead of, I just want to use this one tool. But we'll see. There could be people coming in saying, we want to use drones. maybe we need to add some educational programs around drones.
I want you to know that I personally know at least 5 people who just salivated that you just said we're going to talk about drones. So
Exactly. But it's kind of a funny joke. We'll joke about drones or robots because it's funny to joke about drones and robots. But at the end of the day, drones and robots are actually already proving to be valuable technology in this work.
Sure. Our listeners have heard before, 2 of our guests have actually talked about drones for good.
Yeah.
And drones being used for environmental work, drones being used for humanitarian aid, these kinds of things. So it's,
Exactly. So it's funny, but also at the end of the day, it might really be something that NTEN has on the calendar in a couple of years, And I also think when you work in technology, sometimes we say we work in nonprofits and sometimes we say we work in technology, right? So we work with nonprofits, but we do focus on technology, and that changes every day in ways that most of us don't have any control over. So the idea of what we'll be talking about at the conference or what kind of reports and webinars we'll have 5 years from now, I have no idea. But I know that we will be providing educational resources on the topics that our members are trying to engage with, and that will be, trying to engage the community in figuring out how we continue to improve as a sector. And how we do that certainly relies on the community telling us what they need. But yeah, I don't know if that's a cop-out answer, but I think...
Not at all. You've given us at least 5 different examples about how you see evolution happening from NTEN's genesis, but also what I think is it's just like the technology world in general. It's this constant evolution, which unfortunately for most people ends up becoming a big frustration.
Right.
But it's becoming comfortable with that constant evolution and figuring out, as you said, what outcomes do you really want? And how do you use this menage of tools and resources in order to drive those outcomes more effectively, right?
Yeah, the tools are always going to change. You don't necessarily... My dad worked in construction for his whole career, so I always go to construction examples. But you don't walk onto a construction site where they're building a house and say, let me see the same hammer that you've been using for the last 50 years. You're going to change your tools. And what you're doing is trying to be in a position where you can make a decision about which tool to use and why and at what time and for what purpose and what it's going to cost and what the return on that investment is going to be, because you're building the best house that you can build, not because you just always, no matter what you're doing, want to use that hammer.
The last question that I have for you is one that I ask every guest here in terms of reference. And that is, the people who are listening to this podcast are people who are coming out of a master's degree, looking for their first opportunity or maybe their next opportunity in the nonprofit world, or they're people who are in the profit world or some other sector and they're interested in transitioning into this kind of work.
Yeah.
You have built a successful career in this business. Like almost everyone we interview here on the show, it's, I like to say you sort of stumbled to where you are. There's not this set career path where you've found opportunity, you've excelled, and then you've moved on to the next opportunity or you've created it for yourself. Mm-hmm. Are there 1 or 2 pieces of critical advice you'd give to our audience about how to create that sort of satisfaction and sustainability that you found?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think, as we've been talking, and it's made me think about different jobs that I've had and different communities that I've had the opportunity to work with. My through line, like you said, is not, I left college and said, okay, here's my career path. I would have never picked the path that I had if I had tried to anticipate it ahead of time. And I'm sure that's a consistent comment. But I think for me, what's been my kind of guide in my process as I build my career is knowing who I want to work with and who I want to work for. And when I say work with, what's that team like? Knowing that, because if you don't like who you have to hang out with every day, all day long, you're probably going to burn out a lot more quickly than if you're inspired by the people that you work with, where even if you're having a really hard day or you're up against a deadline, you feel like, okay, everybody's in this together. Knowing what I need and like and want to be around in a team has definitely guided a lot of my decisions. And then also who I want to work for. Do I want to work for a community that is addressing this issue? Do I want to work with communities, all different types? I mean, knowing kind of who you are and what that narrative is, who you want to work for, I think guides a lot, because the mission, right? I mean, that's not going to change. You don't get to come in and just change the mission every organization you work at, but really knowing who it is that you want to serve, regardless of what that mission is, knowing that that's the group of people that you really want to support. Again, that's where you can draw that inspiration from, even if you're feeling like there's so much work to do and you're never going to finish it all, and the to-do list is never going to be cleared off. Knowing that you're inspired by the people that are sitting next to you at the table and that you have the opportunity to serve outside the organization. I think maybe just for me, that's how it works, but I really need to know that that's how I can draw that inspiration and stay motivated. Because if it's just me, what's the point? I could just sit here on my laptop by myself all day. But figuring out that those two kind of inputs for inspiration, because, a job is a job is a job, right? If it's really just a job to you. And for me, even if I wasn't that CEO of NTEN, I'd probably still come in here and do this work, and they would just think I was a crazy person. So this is where I feel like I am inspired by my colleagues and where I'm inspired by the community to do the best work that I can.
Amy, thank you so very much for being a guest on our show.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm happy to have a Skype chat with you anytime.
You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from 8preneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.